everyone, and welcome to At World's Edge, the fantasy lore podcast. I have a long drive ahead of me heading to the Nova convention, so I thought that we would do another driving video. I think I uploaded one of these in the past, and it was super unsuccessful, largely because there was a lot of people beeping in the background. So we'll see how it goes. And maybe it'll be legible and hearable, and I'll be able to put it out there. So we're going to be talking today about some of the things that were brought up in the chat and what had messaged to me as far as subjects we'd like to discuss. The first one that was the most interesting to me, and I gotta say, I've been trying to make a video on this, but it was a little too daunting. So the question was, can we talk about the structure of the Imperial military in Warhammer Fantasy? So the Empire based in the old world, that comprises of mostly humans. And yeah, we can definitely do that. It's a pretty big subject, so I'm going to do it conversationally, and I'm sorry if because there won't be visuals, obviously, because I'm driving and not editing this video. But at the end of the day, I'm not that good at graphics anyway, so it's really not that big of a deal. So, talking about the Empire. So, first of all, it's important to note that the Empire refers to the nation of men, the largest nation and most populous nation in the Warhammer Fantasy world. It's located directly in the center of the old world. It's bordered by the Sea of Claws in the west, and in the east by the World's Edge Mountains, in the north by Troll Country and Kislev, and in the south by the Grey and Black Mountains and Bretonnia beyond. So it's a vast, vast area. It's mostly forested, though it does have cosmopolitan and river environments as well. But because of that largely temperate climate, it's excellent farming grounds, not only for their economy, but also for growing the population. So as stated, it's extremely wealthy and extremely populous. Now, as far as their military is concerned, this is reflected in that. The Empire's military is based broadly on first volunteer troops, and then conscripted troops, followed by heavily elite soldiers at the top, all led in a very top-down function by essentially either hereditary nobility, political nobility, or economic nobility. The Empire, at first, seems like it's a unitarian state. It is not. It's much less like the Empire of Man in 40K, and much more like the Holy Roman Empire of the High Middle Ages-ish in our own history. So it's made up of tons of little states. These can be broadly broken down into 12 elector states, but even under them, and especially when we're talking about the military, we're actually going to want to drill down a bit further, because the military is controlled at a local level. And that's where we're going to start this. So, in our scenario, you are an imperial burgher. That means you're the economic leader of a small town or a city, and the Beastmen, who are the ever-present enemy of the Empire. And that might be a little surprising, because we often think of Chaos Warriors and their armor, or even Orcs and Goblins as the Empire's chief antagonist. And really, the chief antagonist of the Empire changes from generation to generation. We know that the old world has always been populated by Orcs and Goblins and Beastmen, more than anything else. We have these records even as far back as when the dwarves were ruling the dwarves and elves were ruling the area. They were largely they described it as pinpricks of light in a sea of otherwise chaos and danger. So really, every place in the Empire is a constant threat of chaos, and chaos in this case is represented by the Beastmen rather than the traditional warriors of chaos, who, remember, live in the far north, so either Norska or even beyond in the Chaos Wastes. But when it comes to Sorry, that was all off balance. So when it comes to back to our Imperial burger, you found that there is a large force of beastmen arising in the forest, and they are damaging your people's livelihood. They're ambushing your caravans. You need to get this handled. So you raise your militia. Now, the militia of the Empire is the most basic unit. It comprises free companies of men who volunteer and get called up for the service. They're armed with whatever they happen to have. So you might find Imperial free militia armed with cutlasses or pikes or spears or small handguns. In the tabletop, they're represented as having both limited ranged capacity as well as limited hand-to-hand combat capacity or melee capacity. And the free company excel at this quick response, right? They're the first thing they can get called up, but they're not very reliable. Much like militias in the real world, they tend to be low in leadership and morale, and they don't really want to stick around. They're not incentivized to be there beyond saving their families. And to be fair, that's a pretty good incentive, but they're not trained to be soldiers and to survive in a battle in the same way that a state troop is. So that brings us to our next level. The free militia did not work. Your collection of free companies and maybe some local regiments of archers who are regularly hunters, but joined for the sake of protection, it didn't work. The beastmen threat is just growing. So again, on your authority as a burger, you reach out to the level above you, so your local lord, and you tell him, hey, you know what, we need state troops. State troops can be called up by the elector count. In fact, for the last 5 centuries, ever since the Great War against Chaos and the military reforms of Magnus the Pious, every elector count is required to maintain standardized state troops. These troops are trained and equipped at the expense of the elector count, and they're required to have a certain amount of standardization. They're required to be at a certain level, which is a big difference from before that, where everything was just kind of up to the local lord. So the elector count of the area, or the lording in the case that it's not an elector count, provides you with state troops. Now, state troops are highly trained and very numerous. Again, we talked about that the Empire is both wealthy and populous, and state troops reflect this better than anything else. They are well equipped, well armed, and they are well trained. And that training is really what we see as the most important factor about them, because state troops are trained to act in unison. So you'll have your defensive soldiers like spearmen or halberdiers who are designed to take a charge, but then after they take that charge, the enemy is then beset on either side by swords, and this is by swordsmen. And on in the moments before they charged, they had already been led into by volleys of handgun fire from the handgun militia, handgun state troops, who were also attached to that regiment. This regimental interlocking discipline is what the Empire's real strength is. It's the ability to coordinate all of your soldiers into a single unit and move in a cohesive fashion. This isn't something we see in any other Warhammer race. It's really what makes the Empire unique. Every other race is really focused on maybe being warriors or being extra skilled, or I'm a monk mostly, but sometimes I whip out my swords and fight things, i.e. the High Elves. The state troops are not this. They are professional soldiers all the time, in the same way that we think of professional soldiers in our world. They train for this, and then they go to war. The state troops are, at the end of the day, still human. They're not especially strong, or especially fast, or especially magical. They are limited by the biology that they have. So your state troops are not sufficient to wipe out the beastman threat. You have to go up a level more. So now you're going to get into the specialized troops of the Empire. And there's really 3 different places we can go for specialized soldiery. Firstly are the knightly orders. Knightly orders are not professional troops. They're not professional soldiers. They're professional knights. They live in keeps and may be attached to a religious order, such as the Knights of Moor or the Knights of the White Wolf, for Mor and Ulrich, respectively. Or they may just be a collection of warriors who got together, bought some horses, and went to town, such as the Knights of Blood Keep, before they became vampires. And after they became vampires, actually, I'm pretty sure. And then there are some that are actually attached to particular states. These would be the knights, I think the most famous example would be the Reichsguard, which are attached to the Elector Count of Reichland. And he's their Grandmaster, whoever he happens to be. By the end times, it was the Emperor Karl Franz. Knightly orders cannot be ordered to do anything, but they can be called upon to assist by a local lord. Now, the burgher could have done this beforehand, but he probably didn't have the money to pay them. So it's really more up to an Elector Count or a general of the Empire's armies to locate and secure the services of a knightly order. The knightly orders will be led by their precept, or even their Grand Master, if it's or Chapter Master or Grand Master. If you're a Space Marines player, you'll be familiar with all these ranks. But essentially, knighthood is a lifelong profession and a way of life. So, you start off young and inexperienced. You work your way up, earn your spurs, if you're familiar with the expression, and get your first, your lowest level of knighthood as an initiate, and then you move up in the ranks. And the higher that rank goes, until you reach the level of Inner Circle Knight, is how skilled you'll be. And the more, in the Empire's terms, the more experienced knight you want, the more expensive it's probably going to be for you. But hey, you got to get rid of this Beastman threat, so you're going to hire some knights. But knights, are just steel, and you also need some faith, and you also need to take care of the chaos behind these Beastmen, right? There's something driving these creatures beyond the physical. And the Empire has two options there. The first option, and this is probably the most emblematic of the Empire, is the priesthood of Sigmar. And we're going to say Sigmar, but in reality, it's priesthood in general. The Empire is a vast, vast territory of many peoples, as we've said before and we'll say again. And they've got many different faiths. The worship of Tal is especially popular in Talabecland. The Empire's provinces around Averheim have their own worship of the sun god, and there is of course Ulrich in Middenheim, just to name a few of the many gods of the Empire. And there are some that don't have any particular combat attached to them, such as Shyla, the goddess of healing. You're not going to be a lot of warriors attached there, and the god of death, Mor, similarly has a knightly order attached to him, but otherwise doesn't really inspire a lot of fighting. But Sigmar and Ulrich both inspire a lot of fighting, and Sigmar is the official church of the Empire, whereas Ulrich is limited largely to Middenheim. So, the Church of Sigmar in the Empire is arranged like a medieval Catholic church is, with the Grand Theogenist, or the Pope, at the top, some archlectors, cardinals really, below him, and then below him are the ranks of priests. And these are not unlike Catholics most of the time, these are warrior priests. Their job is to go out on the battlefield and do some fighting. So they go out, you can call upon these folks, and it seems to be, unless you can get a letter to Altdorf quickly and have them send out a priestly force, it's going to largely be whoever happens to be there, right? Every town's going to have its own priest. So you can call the Temple of Sigmar up, be like, hey, I need you to come and fight these folks. And that warrior priest isn't just going to come alone, because warrior priests are fiery orators who can light up the whole room, blow the roof off the building, and get everybody on board with the next crusade. And you see that in the tabletop, in the flagellants that follow them around. These are foot soldiers who are absolutely devoted to the worship of their god, and who flagellate, or self-flagellate, so they beat themselves. There was a movie with self-flagellation. The Da Vinci Code. The priest played by Paul Bettany was a self-flagellation enthusiast in that movie. And just imagine an entire regiment of Paul Bettany's self-flagellating and chanting and worshipping Sigmar, heading towards the enemy. and all led by a fiery orator, sometimes on a horse, sometimes on a gigantic chariot, and all worshiping Sigmar and praising him and beating back the power of chaos with just their thoughts and emotions. Never mind, also, their weapons, which are numerous, because again, Sigmar is a warrior god first and foremost. Okay, so you just want to shore yourself up, though. At this point, you've got knightly orders, you've got state troops, you got what's left of your militia, and you've got the worship of the local deity involved. But as that burger, you still need a little bit more. You want to make sure that you really eradicate this beastman threat once and for all. You can also call upon the battle colleges, or the battle magic colleges, or colleges of magic. These were founded by Teclis in again during the war against chaos, 500 years prior to the end times, the same time that Magnus the Pious was reforming the military, and it essentially legalized magic in the Empire. Prior to this, magic was not legal. It was something that people did in private, like think local healers and witches, and they could very easily be burned at the stake by the Church of Sigmar, that we just talked about, because Church of Sigmar is famously anti-magic. Just a little bit of background there. We can go into the lore of Sigmar at some point in the future, but Sigmar fought magic a lot. He fought chaos. He fought Nagash. He fought the local tribes around him. He was not about magic, Sigmar, and his church reflects that. They're not about magic either. They don't like it. But Magnus the Pious realized that magic was the only way to fight some enemies, and so he established the colleges of magic so that hedge wizards could be trained specifically in magic and not be this potential source of chaotic energy and chaos recruits that they are currently, because that's what an untrained wizard is, especially a human one. Though all you pro-elves out there, it is not exclusively humans. There are elves corrupted by chaos. Marathi. So, you can recall upon, again, the colleges of magic to send out a wizard to help you out, and they could send either a high-ranking, almost noble member of their guild, or they could even send just basically a trainee. Either way, it's a powerful additional force to you. And they'll specialize in one of the 8 colleges of the 8 winds of magic. Unlike, say, elves, like we talked about, or Tzeentchian sorcerers, human minds can really only comprehend one wind of magic at a time. They can't do all 8. It's not, their brain can't handle it. They don't have the centuries upon centuries to learn a new wind of magic. They've really just got the one. So you'll call them up, and maybe you'll have the ability to pick which one you'd want. You certainly do on the tabletop. You can switch between fire and shadow and death, all you want on the tabletop. But in reality, you're probably going to get the one that's closest or nearby, or who can respond quickest, because they can conjure a fiery steed and fly towards you. And those are the 3 big branches. They exist outside. Again, the church, the knightly orders, and the colleges of magic all exist outside the imperial military structure. They're not controlled by, the professional head of the military. And you have to call upon those sources, but they are important auxiliaries that can really shore up and boost the strength of those large numbers and well-equipped troops that you have already. And there's a 4th branch. This one I keep a little bit to the side, because they're like the colleges of magic in that they're a separate group, but on the other hand, they are very much ingrained in the imperial military. And this would be the gunnery school, or the imperial artillery regiments. This is the source of black powder weapons in the Empire, and they're based in Nuln, which is a bit south and to the east of Altdorf. And they're responsible for training the crews, building the weapons, and deploying them on the battlefield. It's considered, by comparison to, say, the Dwarven Engineers Guild, or the non-existent engineers guilds of other races, is considered extremely progressive, coming up with such things as the war wagon and the steam tank and the Marienburg land ship, among their most creative endeavors, but also responsible for the great cannon and the mortars and the organ guns that populate the Imperial ranks on the regular, and people are familiar with seeing all the time. And so with that, calling upon this group of people allows our intrepid burgher, or overly prepared burgher perhaps, to add ranged firepower. Now, the state troops do have handguns, which have range, and they have access to crossbowmen and archers through their free militia recruitment. But there's really not otherwise, besides the Imperial College Gunnery School, there's not a lot of strong ranged power. You're not going to have artillery from any other source. The Empire doesn't have a tradition of trebuchets at the point in history we're talking about. They're not using ballistae. They're using gunpowder weapons, which means the Gunnery College has a monopoly on that, and you're going to have to go ahead and talk to them if you want to purchase them. Now, unlike, say, calling the Imperial Gunnery College is a little bit different. So you could have just bought a whole bunch of cannons for your town, and that would be fine. They'd be there. You'd just train the crews, and they'd work the cannons, and that'd be like a permanent standing force, as opposed to, say, the church, or the knightly orders, or the colleges of magic, who are going to send a person out every time. So you don't. That's why I kept it a little bit separate. You don't need to call the Gunnery College every time you have to fight a battle. But if you do, what you get is an engineer coming out who's going to make the artillery that you already bought much, much better because he's an expert. Or two, he's 100% going to bring experimental technology to test out on the enemy, whether it's bomb-carrying pigeons or a new way of doing firing weaponry. He's going to bring experimental practices because, like the Leonardo da Vinci characters he's based on, he's going to come to the battle not with the aim of actually winning it. He doesn't really care about that so much, but he does care about making sure that his ideas are tested on the field of battle. So whatever he's working on, he's going to try and put it into effect, and that can be a huge boon for a local lord. It can also blow up in your face because, again, these are untested technologies. But as with all progress, every little increment moves the conversation forward. So, as a rule, these eccentric battle engineers tend to be a good source of energy on the battlefield in general. So we've talked about the constituent parts of an Imperial force. So just to recap, at the very bottom, the lowest level are your militias. These are your unprofessionally trained, but probably competent, archers and free company. Right above them, you have the professional regiments of soldiers who the Empire trains and equips at their expense. And again, these are per elector count, so they can be all very different, although they should carry standardized equipment. And then you have auxiliary in the form of knights, wizards, mages, and artillery. So who's leading all of this? Well, we mentioned that the burgher in this scenario called up these troops to help fight the beastmen. Well, that is who called up the force. Who's going to lead it is probably not him, because he's a economic leader, not going to fight some stuff. Troops could be led by a professional general. This could be a mercenary who was hired and who's going to lead the force because of his superior leadership. It could be a soldier who worked his way up the ranks and is now a professional general in the military. And it could also be a hereditary leader, such as an elector count or the emperor himself. Either way, and of course also it could be a religious leader, such as an archlector, a leader of the knights, such as a grand master, or a battle wizard of sufficient rank and experience to command troops. The goal is, much like the rest of the Empire, efficiency. It's not like Bretonnia, where leadership is going to be determined by who has the highest rank, or High Elves, where leadership is determined by the politics of the day. Imperial leadership is supposed to be the most experienced soldier in the room. So it may not be, even though the Elector count outranks everyone else on the battlefield besides the Emperor, he may not lead the force. It may be a crusade, in which case it's going to be led by the Archlector, the most experienced religious person there. Facing the Beastmen, you're probably going to want to go with the Grand Master of the Knights that you brought with you, because, again, they're familiar with fighting in that territory, they're familiar with fighting Beastmen, and they've been experienced on hundreds of battlefields. But regardless of who leads at that level, you can be assured that it's someone who's going to be coming with a lot of experience. There's very few examples in Imperial lore where just grossly incompetent people took over the battlefield instead of someone who was better there. And sometimes even the grossly incompetent ones end up being militarily excellent, such as Marius Leitdorf, the Mad Count of Averland, who was mad, but on the battlefield he was able to extract some brilliance out of himself and pull victories out of a hat. Well, that brings us to the top of the Imperial, authority pyramid. So, as we talked about, on the battlefield, the most senior leader is going to be the person who has the most experience. The exception to this being the heads of the Imperial state. So, the head of the church, whether it's R. Ulrich of Middenheim, for the case of worshippers of Ulrich, or the Grand Theogonists of Sigmar, they're going to take control regardless, because their authority simply outmatches anyone else, and they really can't get to those positions without a strong battlefield success ratio. You can't be the head of a warrior church without being a warrior. Similarly, if the Emperor shows up on the field, he's going to be in charge. He outranks all of the Elector counts, and especially in the cases of the time periods that we're talking about. So, whether we're talking about Warhammer Fantasy set in the End Times, or Warhammer the Old World set right around the Great War Against Chaos, the Emperor is a warrior. Now, there have been non-warrior emperors who should not take the field. Boris Goldfinger, for example, who sold Marienburg so that he could enrich himself. He would not be great on the battlefield, so we really should not have him. But Karl Franz is an excellent warrior, probably the best since Sigmar. Magnus the Pious was a warrior who fought against the forces of chaos in the field. And the period we're talking about in Old World when it launches, if it ever launches, yes, I was just as disappointed in yesterday's reveals as everyone else, I'm sure. All of those emperors are warriors. They're fighting each other constantly. They're fighting the incursions of beastmen and greenskins. It's a violent time, and the people of the Empire look to military leadership rather than political leadership. So the Games Workshop, the people crafting this storyline, have purposely put us in a situation where we're going to be looking at warrior leaders. And the Emperor of Mankind can always be, in the terms of our games, assured to be that leader and that resource for people on the battlefield. All right, folks, this was 30 minutes of me talking at you. Thank you for keeping me company while I was on this road trip. And I'll probably put out a couple more videos this weekend as I go through the tournament and think up some subjects to talk about. Hopefully you'll have me back to my regular style of PowerPoint plus graphics presentations in the future. I do love me some PowerPoint, and you'll be able to look at something besides my mug talking for 30 minutes. But I hope you had a good time, hope you learned some things, and please leave suggestions and comments and hate mail in the comments below. I'll talk to you later, folks. Please tune in. Please click like, share, and subscribe.